Hi guys, so today's video is all about the lightest skin tones, and I also have another video that's available on my website right now about redheads, and it's a 20-minute video in depth all about redheads and redhead coloring and the confusion that could take place with redheads. So I really hope you check it out, and it's only on my website right now, but it will be available on YouTube in a week. Okay, so if you are new here, you can watch my video titled The Foreskin Undertones, which I will leave down below, about my own color analysis system called Artistic License. And if you're confused, I also offer color consults that I will leave a link to down below as well. So I believe that the skin undertone is the determining factor in finding our best colors, and the skin undertone falls on a spectrum of cool to warm. The cool and radiant undertones have a lot of blue dominance to the skin, so they look amazing in cool, bright colors. The cool and delicate undertones have only a slight blue dominance to the skin, so they look amazing in cool, muted colors. The warm and delicate undertones have a slight yellow dominance to the skin, so they look amazing in warm and muted colors. And finally, the warm and radiant undertones have a lot of yellow dominance to the skin, so they look great in warm and bright colors. So I have a very, very bold proposition to make in this video, and that is that all extremely, extremely light skin tones are cool and radiant. And the reason why I feel okay making such a bold proposition is because I've seen it in real life. I've seen it with my clients, and I've also seen that I could not find any extremely light skin tones that were not cool and radiant. So I want to share with you guys more of my reasoning and also show some examples too. So let's get into it. So we're really talking about people like Nicole. Nicole is an example of an extremely, extremely light skin tone. Kate, on the other hand, already has some pigment to her skin tone, so she's not light enough for this effect to take place. So definitely, I'm not saying that all light skin tones are cool and radiant. It's only this very, very special case of the extremely, extremely lightest of the light skin tones like Nicole. Wouldn't it be amazing if I could find cool and delicate or warm and delicate or warm and radiant ladies to compare side by side and find some examples of them in a very, very, very extremely light skin tone. And I wanted to find someone to compare to these three ladies so that they would have the same extremely light skin tone, but instead be not cool and radiant like these three ladies, but maybe cool and delicate or warm and delicate or warm and radiant. And I want to share with you guys that I really couldn't find any. That is, I couldn't find anyone as light as these ladies who was not cool and radiant. That is to say that, of course, I could find cool and radiant ladies of all different skin depths, and you can see from left to right Anne Hathaway, Nazanin Boniadi, and Alicia Keys all looking amazing in royal blues, so you can see that they are all cool and radiant, and I mention them in my videos pretty often, and these three ladies are definitely cool and radiant. And you can see that Anne Hathaway's skin is really extremely, extremely light. But then when I went ahead and tried to find a cool and delicate lady who is as light as Anne Hathaway, I couldn't find one. There was no cool and delicate lady that's as light as Anne Hathaway, as light as Nicole Kidman. The same went for warm and delicate. I couldn't find any lady who was as light as Anne Hathaway or as light as Nicole Kidman who was warm and delicate. And the same also went for warm and radiant. I couldn't find any lady who was as light as Anne Hathaway, as light as Nicole Kidman, who was also warm and radiant. So this is in part why I concluded that very light skin can only really be cool and radiant. But this isn't the only part of it. Of course, in real life, I saw a coworker of mine who was very, very light-skinned, very light. She was a redhead, and she was cool and radiant. She looked amazing in royal blue. And one day she ran a marathon, and she came back, and she was warm and delicate, unmistakably. I also saw this effect in clients of mine, where they would look very cool if they were extremely, extremely light, and then they would become warm and delicate, or even warm and radiant if they added enough of their own pigment. So that's to say that my coworker and my clients, in the absence of any pigment, were cool and radiant, and when they added their own pigment, they were warm and delicate or warm and radiant. And of course, some of my clients also maintain their initial cool and radiant undertone because they have cool and radiant pigment, or they might have the initial cool and radiant undertone but then have cool and delicate pigment. So this is to say that the skin pigment can be any color. It can be cool and radiant, it can be warm and radiant, whatever. It could be any color, and it's really what happens in the absence of pigment altogether that we want to talk about in this video. So in the absence of pigment, the pigment is no longer the determining factor in the skin color because there is no pigment. And what I think is taking place is another effect altogether. Because there's no pigment, then I think that the blue capillaries and the blue veins show through and they create a strong blue dominance in the skin, giving everyone who has this extremely, extremely light skin with no skin pigment this cool and radiant undertone to the skin. And this is different from having cool and radiant pigment. Remember, we don't have any pigment here. But what could happen is that you could start out with your initial cool and radiant undertone because of the veins and capillaries. And then if your pigment happens to be warm and you add enough of your warm pigment by tanning, then you will appear to have a warm undertone. And on the other hand, if your pigment happens to be cool, then you will continue to have a cool undertone just like before you tanned. So let's talk about an example. So here we have Emilia Clarke, who is usually warm and delicate, and you can see that against that blue dress, her skin looks a little bit yellow maybe, and in that cream gold type of a dress, she just looks really amazing, and we can pay attention to her and not be distracted by her dress, and her skin looks really glowy. So Emilia is warm and delicate. But when you compare Emilia on the left with her own natural pigment, where she has a little bit of a warm color to her, maybe a little bit of a yellow type of a tint to her skin, so she's definitely slightly warm, and you compare that to when she really doesn't have any color to her skin, any pigment to her skin, you can see that her skin, where she doesn't have too much pigment, at its lightest is cool and radiant, and she looks pretty good in optic white, and that is a cool and radiant color. And you could say to yourself, well, how do you know she looks good in optic white? She could look better in cream because she's actually warm and delicate. So what I did was I actually changed the color of her dress, and you can see just how much better, well, I hope you see what I see. I think she looks so much better in the blue dress there on the left than in the cream colored dress, the yellow dress on the right. You can see that on the right, her leg against that yellow color looks a little bit grayed and a little bit less healthy looking than her leg does against the blue color on the left. So in this image, she is definitely a cool toned and not warm like she was before. And you can see in this $1 million image, and I call it a $1 million image because in this one image, we can see a difference between the color of her legs and the color of her arms and her neck and face. And so I think that because her arms and her neck and face got a little bit more sun than maybe her legs did, her legs have maintained this cool and radiant undertone. And you can see how that tomato red against her legs doesn't really look that flattering, but the tomato red against her arms and against her face looks really flattering because when she is not tan at all, when she doesn't have any of her own warm and delicate pigment, she is cool and radiant because of the blueness of the capillaries showing through. But then when she gains some of her own pigment is warm and delicate, and so she looks amazing in a warm color. So Emilia at her lightest is cool and radiant, and she would be flattered by cool and radiant colors and not look so great in warm and delicate colors. And then when she gains enough of her warm and delicate pigment, she would not be so flattered by cool and radiant colors. She would instead be flattered by warm and delicate colors. But I want to stress here that I don't think one is more real or more natural than another. And it's really not about this kind of thinking that, well, I I'm cool and radiant now, but my natural pigment is warm and delicate, so I'm naturally warm and delicate. I don't think that there is one natural way to be either very, very light or very tanned. I think that it's all about understanding your own undertone and being able to work with it and wearing the colors that best suit it. So it's really all about that, and that's what we're trying to do here. So Emilia goes from cool and radiant to warm and delicate. But now let's take a look at an example of someone who goes from cool and radiant as their initial undertone and maintains her cool and radiant coloring as she tans. You can see Kirsten Dunst here on the left looking very, very light. So here she would be cool and radiant simply because she is light enough for that effect to take place that we're talking about. But then when she tans a little bit more, she still doesn't really look that flattered by these warm colors. So she stays cool and radiant because her initial undertone is cool and radiant, and then when she gains her own pigment, her pigment is also cool and radiant. And you can also see her here looking pretty wonderful at all different skin depths in these cool colors. And I really, really love that image on the far right of her because you can see how amazing that really bright blue looks against her skin, and her skin just looks so glowing and so radiant. But on the other hand, in that same image, I think that maybe her hair is a little bit too yellow for her undertone, so it looks a teeny tiny bit separate from her. So I just love that image. So you guys could say, well, I don't really like that image of Kirsten on the far left. I don't think that blue necessarily looks good on her, but I want to invite you guys to take a look at this same dress in a yellow color, and I hope you see what I see. And I see that the yellow against her skin kind of makes her skin look a little bit gray and a little bit less healthy than the blue does, and I think she definitely looks much, much better in the blue than she does in the yellow rendition of this dress. So she is definitely cool and radiant here, and that blue is a pretty clear blue color. It's not grayed or muted in any way. It's just a light clear blue color, and I think it looks amazing on her. So Kirsten maintains her cool undertone either because of the initial undertone when she didn't have any pigment like on the left, or because her real natural pigment is also a cool undertone pigment. So she is going to look amazing all the time in royal blues, purples, magenta, and lighter versions of those colors, provided that those colors are cool and bright. So we went over two ladies. We have Emilia Clarke on the left, who starts out cool and radiant and happens to have some warm and delicate pigment. So when she gets enough of her pigment, she becomes warm and delicate. And we also have Kirsten Dunst, who starts out cool and radiant just like Emilia, but her pigment happens to be cool and radiant also. So when she tans, she maintains her cool and radiant undertone. So that is it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Check out the redhead video that I have posted on my website, and that will be out on YouTube in about a week. And also, if you're still confused, of course, you can check out my color consults, and I will leave a link down below to that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.